yet another room, back reading No Bad Parts with Richard C. Schwartz. We are on the busier Foster side of my building, so you may hear some road noise, but I also just love this wood wall, and the light is so beautiful in here, so I thought we can deal with road noise and squeaky chairs to read a good book. Yeah. I hope you're doing well. I'm excited to get back into this. I took one day off, and I woke up today and was like, I want to go read that book. So here I am. Where are we? Okay, we read chapter 7. I believe we are on chapter 8, Vision and Purpose. Okay, so at the end of this chapter, we'll be in part 3. Woo! Getting through it. This is a surprisingly dense book. Like, not that it's hard to read, but there's so much in here for not being super thick. I'm surprised. Also, sorry if you hate this. I don't hate it, and it's helpful. I'm having my coffee. Just had a breakfast sandwich. I'm excited to dive in. Okay. I hope you can hear me okay. I might scoot this forward a little bit. We're very close. Okay. Chapter 8, Vision and Purpose. Generally speaking, as you get more access to self and become more self-led, you also attain more clarity about the vision you have for your life, which means that your priorities may be quite different than they were when your protectors were in charge. When we have lots of exiles, our protectors have no choice but to be egotistic, hedonistic, and dissociative. Even those who seem selfless because they give so much to others are often more concerned about being viewed by others as virtuous or not being punished by God. Your protectors' goals for your life revolve around keeping you away from all that pain, shame, loneliness, and fear, and they use a wide array of tools to meet those goals. Achievement, substances, food, entertainment, shopping, sex, obsession with your appearance, caretaking, meditation, money, and so on. Your protectors work tirelessly and valiantly to keep pumping air into your ego so it doesn't deflate and sink in the abyss of exiled emotion. As the urges of these protectors consume most of your attention, they drown out and keep exiled the most sensitive and loving parts of you. As you unburden your exiles, it allows your protectors to transform, and you begin hearing more from those parts of you that aren't so obsessed and driven. The ones who love being truly intimate with others, the ones who want to create art and move your body, the ones who want to play with family and friends, the ones who just love being in nature. When you're more self-led, you become a more complete, integrated, and whole person. This is what healing means in IFS. Wholeness and reconnection, and a self who wants to facilitate that at all levels of a system. As Wendell Berry writes, healing complicates the system by opening and restoring connections among the various parts, in this way restoring the ultimate simplicity of their union. The parts are healthy insofar as they are joined harmoniously to the whole. Only by restoring the broken connections can we be healed. Connection is health. In addition to connecting to neglected parts, as you access more self, you shift from being led by your part's desires to being led by your heart's desires. That is, you begin getting inklings of a different vision for your life's journey that brings more meaning to it. While there are countless approaches out there that coach you to articulate and pursue a meaningful vision for your life, too often those attempts come from your managers rather than yourself. In my experience, it's best to wait until your protectors have relaxed so that the vision emerges. In this way, you receive your vision rather than create it. A number of spiritual traditions teach that we each have a true path or calling, and part of why we're here in this life is to find out and fulfill what that is. Jean Houston uses a term borrowed from Aristotle to describe this. Entelechy. The seeded, coded essence in you which contains both the patterns and possibilities for your life. Christians sometimes refer to Ephesians 2:10, which states that God created each of us for a specific purpose. When parts unburden, they often immediately sense their original purpose and take on a commensurate new role. When people access self, they often quickly sense their purpose. In the outer world, that realization might take years. In the inner world, it often happens immediately. Humanistic psychologist Abraham Maslow is well known for his ideas on self-actualization. He asserted that after our basic needs for safety, belonging, and affection are met, we become aware of a higher need to do what we're best suited for. A musician must make music, an artist must paint, a poet must write, if he is to be ultimately at peace with himself. This tendency might be phrased as the desire to become more and more with one idiosyncratically what one idiosyncratically is, to become everything that is one is capable of becoming. Okay, one more time. This tendency might be phrased as the desire to become more and more what one idiosyncratically is, to become everything that one is capable of becoming. I find there to be too much striving in Maslow's early writings to be all you can be. But I agree that our purpose or vision naturally arises when our survivalist parts relax. After Maslow had studied self-actualizing people later in his life, he found that while they may not have maximized their potential in every area of their life, these people worked at causes that benefited others and were precious to them, such that it didn't feel like work at all. Through their self-led vision, they had found their purpose, and consequently their lives felt full of meaning. His psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman notes, creative self-actualizers are capable of transcending the ordinary dichotomy between the intelligence of the mind and the wisdom of the heart. They are able to throw their whole selves into their work, flexibly switching between seemingly contradictory modes of being, the rational and the irrational, the emotional and the logical, the deliberate and the intuitive, and the imaginative and the abstract, without prejudging the value of any of these processes. This is an excellent description of the flexible integration that occurs in a self-led system. The different parts maintain their separateness while communicating and collaborating with each other, while the self conducts this inner orchestra. Well-known neuropsychiatrist Dan Siegel has emphasized the importance of such integration and healing and has described IFS as a good way to achieve that. He writes, "Health comes from integration. It's that simple and that important. A system that is integrated is in a flow of harmony, just as in a choir, with each singer's voice both differentiated from the other singers' voices, but also linked. Harmony emerges with integration." What is important to note is that this linkage does not remove the differences, as in the notion of blending. Instead, it maintains these unique contributions as it links them together. Integration is more like a fruit salad than a smoothie. This, again, is one of the basic goals of IFS. Each part is honored for its unique qualities while also working in harmony with all the others. In contrast, in a protector-led system, either one coalition of parts dominates so much that you lose access to the resources of the others, or it's just internal chaos and conflict in which parts constantly interrupt and sabotage one another because there's no steady leadership. Life changes and backlash. When you begin getting glimpses of a self-led vision, it's common for parts to react homeostatically. The grander your vision, the bigger their backlash. "Don't kid yourself," they'll say. Who do you think you are that you could do that? Or what's the point? Everything's so screwed up, it will never make a difference. Or the ever popular, you can't make a living doing that. When I first got the vision of IFS and considered devoting my life to it, I had all of those reactions and more. After receiving my vision, I had to work with my parts just to manifest the initial stages, and my parts backlash each step of the way. This book represents a bolder step on the journey of trying to bring IFS to a much wider audience, and here those voices are again, right on cue. The difference now is that these parts trust my leadership, so they aren't as loud or harsh as they once were, and they respond well to my reassurances. They know that if some of you don't like this book, and even attack it for some reason, we'll be okay, because I will take care of them. That's the kind of work that will allow you to pursue your own vision. Bring all of your parts along for the ride. No need to exile or override the dissenters. Fair warning, I've had clients quit lucrative careers to pursue what had only been a faint inner yearning throughout their lives. Recently, a high-powered corporate lawyer left his firm and went back to school to become a gym teacher. This was not something I led him to, but as this client healed, he finally listened and had the courage to act. Such a move takes much more courage than it used to. These days, people can hardly earn a living doing the most meaningful kinds of work, whereas some of the most meaningless kinds are the highest paid. That being said, self-led people do have less need for material things, and that helps a lot. Some, like my lawyer client, are willing and better able to take the hit, but it's a shame that they have to. Not all of my increasingly self-led clients quit their jobs or make U-turns in their careers, but they typically change their lives in some way for the better. Many get involved in creative or altruistic activities that are rewarding in their own right and provide a new sense of meaning. Self-led visions are frequently based on an increased sense of connection to humanity and the earth, and people begin embodying the desire to help both. In addition, when you are self-led, these activities are more satisfying because you are actually present in your body while you are experiencing them versus a life of impatiently planning the next activity or obsessing about how you could be doing something more productive or pleasurable. When self-led, you actually can live in the present because you no longer have so many parts that are hurting and stuck in the past. You are no longer trying to protect them by worrying about or planning the future. Interestingly enough, you might even have parts who tell you your vision is too small. But as Charles Eisenstein reports, so many people squelch the expression of their gifts by thinking that they must do something big with them. One's own actions are not enough. One must write a book that reaches millions. How quickly this turns into a competition over whose ideas get heard. How it invalidates the small, beautiful strivings of the bulk of humanity, and validates paradoxically the very things we must start doing en masse to sustain a livable planet. As people become more self-led, they find themselves acting altruistically without effort and without so much inner debate, because it just feels natural to them to want to help others. This is because self recognizes that you and the others are part of a larger body of humanity. It's the same as when, say, your angry parts start to feel more connected and recognizes that the manager that it hated because of how much it tried to stifle the anger is also connected to the larger entity, you. This leads to parts recognizing that when one member of the system is hurt or burdened, it affects the larger system that they all belong to. If your leg was aching, your hand would automatically move to try to soothe it. As parts come to realize there's a you that they're all members of, they're increasingly aware that when one of them is burdened, it affects the whole system. Naturally, they begin to help and care for each other out of that awareness. They become systems thinkers, and they increasingly come to trust self to lead both inside and outside. Consequently, they support your external altruism with the knowledge that you're not just going to focus out there. So when people become more and more self-led, they become increasingly prompted to take action on behalf of healing humanity and healing our planet. At this point in time, there's a critical need for more self at all levels. Imagine what it would be like if all our leaders knew about self-leadership and practiced it. This is the kind of larger vision that came to me years ago and has impassioned me ever since. I never thought that I and others could bring in it this far in my lifetime, but we've done so much that I've stopped considering it a pipe dream. Exercise. Fire drill. So now I want to invite you to try an exercise that will help you experience some of this self-leadership I've been talking about. I want you to start by thinking of a person in your life, past or present, who really triggers you. Maybe they make you angry or sad, or maybe there's somebody you closed your heart to at some point. In your mind's eye, put that person in a room by themselves so they're contained and they can't get out right now. Now look at the person through some kind of window, and while you watch the person from outside, from the safety of not being in that room, have them do or say the things that upset you, and notice what happens in your body and your mind as your protector jumps in. That is, notice what your protector does to your muscles, to your heart, and feel what kind of impulses you have. Check out your breathing too. We're just noticing the impact of a protective part on your body and mind. Now take another look at the person from this place and get a sense of how they look to you through the eyes of this protector. Reassure your protector that you're not going to go into that room so it can stand down for a little while. See if it's willing to separate its energy from you, because you're not going to put yourself in jeopardy right now. And if it's willing to pull its energy out of you, you'll notice a palpable shift in your body and your mind as that happens. What are your muscles like now? What's your heart like? Your breathing? Also pay attention to what's going on in your mind, and then take another look at the person in the room to see if they appear any differently. What does the person look like now? Then focus again on the protector, who jumps up when you focus on this person. See if you can become curious about it now that it's separated from you a little more. And if you can, ask the protector why it feels such a need to become so strong like this person, with this person. What's it afraid would happen if it didn't do that for you? In answering that question, it's likely that it told you about vulnerable parts that it protects, so see if you can show appreciation to it for working so hard to keep those parts safe for you. Those parts of you safe. See how it reacts to your appreciation. Ask it if it could heal those parts so they weren't vulnerable to this person. Would it have to be so involved in protecting them? What might it like to do instead inside of you? We're not going to go into the holding room that triggering person is. We're not going to go into the room holding that triggering person in this exercise. However, I want you to get a sense of what it would be like if you did. If you entered that room feeling more self-led, what might that look like? How would it play out in terms of how you would relate to this person? If that's difficult to imagine, it might be because your protector still doesn't trust that it's safe to let you do that. If you do have a sense of how different the experience would be, convey that to the protector and ask what it would take for that part to trust you to lead with triggering people like this one. And if it's still afraid to trust you, ask for more information about that. When the time feels right, thank this part for whatever it did. Show it appreciation for whatever it allowed you to do or let you know. Finally, begin to shift your focus back outside and take deep breaths if that helps. There's a hummingbird outside my window. So beautiful. In this exercise, if your protector did step to the side, you probably noticed a big shift. In your conversation with the protector, you probably did learn something about the parts it protects and how vulnerable they are. And because those vulnerable parts weren't healed by that exercise, it's likely that it's not going to trust you until they are healed, but it's still interesting to learn about why it doesn't trust you to handle people like that. You may also have noticed when the protector stepped out that your body felt different and the person in the room looked different. Maybe they didn't look quite as menacing. Maybe you could see some of the pain that drove them to do whatever harmful things they have done. Exercise, sad person meditation. Here's a similar exercise I'd like you to try. Instead of a triggering person, I want you to think of a different person who you've been with when they were very upset, extremely sad and hurt, for example, and maybe crying. Take a second to think of this person and, as before, put them in the contained room. Watch them through the window as they demonstrate how hurt or sad they are. As you watch them, just notice what comes up in your body and your mind. Notice the thoughts you have about them, even if you're not very proud of those thoughts, and notice all the different parts that react to this person. Feel how those parts affect your body. What are they doing to your heart or your breathing, your muscles, your impulses? You might notice parts who are making it hard to watch the person in the room. Maybe they feel powerless, want to withdraw, run away, keep your heart closed, or are active in some other way that seems protective. Pick one of those parts and get to know it better. Let it know that right now you don't have to do anything for this person and that they're going to stay in the room. It can relax a little bit and separate if it can. If it does, notice the palpable shift and look again at the person through these new eyes and get a vision of how you might want to be with this person if your parts would allow it. As before, shift your focus back to the protector and ask it what it's afraid would happen if it didn't do this to you inside. Why doesn't it trust you to stay with this person? And when this part of the exercise feels complete, you can thank this protector for its work and begin to shift your focus back outside. These two exercises are examples of how we go about fostering self-leadership. I use what I call a constraint releasing approach to accessing self instead of trying to instill good qualities in a process some call resourcing. I have you notice the parts that interfere with your access to self and then get to know those parts and help them trust you, yourself, to handle difficult people. If this were a full IFS session, I'd have you get permission to go to the part whose protectors are taking care of I'd have you get permission to go to the parts those protectors are taking care of and heal them. When you do that, your protectors become much more likely to trust your leadership. Often your protectors don't trust you with the difficult task of protection because they think the self is too tender and is only capable of caring and compassion. My experience is that the self is adept at all of the C words that are related to being nice to people, including clarity, confidence, and courage. So when you see through the clear eyes of yourself that someone is doing something hurtful to your parts, you don't have to turn them into a monster. That clarity empowers you to see that their actions arise out of their own hurt, and you also can better see without confusion the damage they do to your parts. This means you have the courage and confidence to set boundaries with them in an effective and, if necessary, very forceful way. It's important to help your parts trust that they really can rely on you to deal with people and set boundaries that'll protect them, and that actually, if they trust you to do it, the effect will be more powerful and effective. Ideally, this is what the martial arts foster: protection from a non-attached but powerful place. As you enter triggering situations, it's interesting to notice what happens in your body and your mind. You'll start to notice trailheads, which will enable you to learn about the parts that feel a need to protect. If you have access to a therapist or skilled practitioner of IFS, you can then actually go through all the healing steps with support. As you do so, your parts will gradually come to trust you more and won't be so triggered in the future. Immanence and transcendence. I want to conclude this part of the book by exploring some of the promises of self-leadership in a little more depth. To begin with, once you retrieve your exiles and liberate your protectors, you feel more. This is not just because you become more embodied, it's also because you re-experience many of the emotions you felt in childhood but thought you'd left behind when you became an adult. That means you can feel more of your former exiles' awe, joy, and empathy, but also their pain and fear. That's good news. However, because being self-led means you know how to comfort those parts better, and their feelings don't overwhelm you nearly as much as they once did. You're less detached and more invested. You truly care about what happens on this plane. At the same time, you've likely had enough experiences with the wave state of self to know that there is much more to the universe than what happens inside of you, and that in the grandest scheme of things, everything is okay. In that sense, you become less attached to what happens on this plane. Being self-led means honoring both of these truths equally: immanence, fully engaging our humanness, and transcendence or liberation, knowing that there's so much more. When we try to deny our vulnerability, we lose touch with our heart. When we fail to realize our divinity, we lose access to our wisdom and perspective. Self-leadership means standing willingly and consciously in both dimensions, feeling the intense emotions of your parts while remaining connected to your transcendent wave state awakened mind. If you can hold both in yourself, you can be with both in others. Some contemplative traditions encourage people to dismiss the concerns of the outside world or withdraw from it as much as possible. For some trauma survivors, this approach has great appeal because their experience of the world has been harsh and painful, and it's relieving to have some haven from that. While helping you to experience your transcendent self, some traditions also imply that your personal history, traumas and all, isn't actually all that important. In fact, it's part of your ego's attachment to the mundane world and should be transcended. Through the lens of IFS, this approach only creates more exiles or pushes the exiles you already have further away. I don't think that any of this is necessary. You can be self-led and spend time in long retreats or even live as a monastic and do so without bypassing your exiles. Activists often rebuke spiritual devotees. Eisenstein articulates the critique like this. If the house were burning down, would you just sit there and meditate, visualizing cool waterfalls to put out the fire through the power of manifestation? Well, the figurative house is burning down around us right now. The deserts are spreading, the coral reefs are dying, and the last of the indigenous are being wiped out. And there you are in the middle of it all, contemplating the cosmic sound Om. Of course, the counter-argument to this rebuke is fairly straightforward. Unless you create a self-led inner world, whatever you do in the outer world will wind up being protector-led and therefore no different, or in some cases worse, than what you're trying to counter. For this reason, we're after a balance. It's important to fully examine your motives for both inner and outer activities. Are you overwhelmed by the suffering of the world and want to get away from it? If so, you might want to work with your exiles before you find your balance. Are you an activist because you want everyone to know what a good person you are, or because you're driven by burdens from your past? There's more need than ever for self-led people to not withdraw but engage in the world. However, to be self-led, people have to spend time inside themselves. Many leaders I know, including myself, find an inner-outer rhythm that works well for them. When you can balance immanence and transcendence, you can bring healing to the inner and outer world simultaneously. As David Dellinger writes, do you change people first or do you change society? I believe this is a false dichotomy. You have to change both simultaneously. If you're changing only yourself and have no concern for changing society, something goes awry. If you're changing only society but not changing yourself, something goes awry, as tended to happen in the late 1960s. Now simultaneously may be an overstatement, because I think there are periods when one has to concentrate on one or the other. And there are periods in a society and a culture when the emphasis is appropriate only on one or the other. What I'm trying to say is never lose sight of either the internal world or the external world, the peace within and the peace based on justice on the outside. Servant leadership and contagion. One common objection to doing inner work is that it will make you more egocentric than you already are. My experience is quite the opposite. The more we unburden our parts, the less we need material things or accolades to fill our emptiness. We also feel more connected to others, to our bodies, to ourselves, and to self. While I've never needed much materially, during the early years of developing and selling IFS, my exiles craved stroking, and that craving interfered with my ability to convey its power. It's been a big relief in the last decade or so to have healed those parts and offer IFS more from self. These days, people sometimes comment on how humble I am, but genuine humility is hard-earned. I did a lot of inner work healing my exiles, and through spending time in the wave state, I've come to realize that IFS isn't about me. I've realized it over the years as part of my vision, and with the help of so many in that way, IFS has been a gift and a blessing. Another name for self-leadership could be selfless leadership, and it sounds a lot like the servant leadership model of the business world. Started by AT&T executive Robert Greenleaf, servant leadership begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first. The conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. That person is sharply different from the one who is leader first, perhaps because of the need to assuage an unusual power drive or to acquire material possessions. The difference manifests itself in the care taken to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. Do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit at least, or at least not be further deprived? When it comes to serving, my primary caution is to be aware of self-sacrificing, caretaking manager parts. Too many leaders have exiled so many other parts of themselves that they become overextended and burn out. Real servant leadership only works when a leader has access to self and all of their parts. The organization they lead will then reflect the leader's inner harmony and connectedness. This brings us to the important topic of contagion, otherwise known as resonance. I've never heard this. Contagion is also known as resonance. Interesting. Protector parts are contagious in the sense that when one member of a system, particularly the leader, is blended with a protector part, it often activates protectors of others, and the culture of the organization becomes permeated with that protective energy. Correspondingly, self-led people bring out the selves of those around them. As when one vibrating tuning fork sets off another one at a distance, the presence of self in a system helps protectors relax and elicit self throughout the organization. Earlier I alluded to the phenomenon of resonance in physics, and that bears repeating here. Because our particular self is an aspect of a vibrating field, it will resonate with the self in other people and with the self in our parts. Physicists are increasingly recognizing that everything in the universe is constantly vibrating or oscillating at different frequencies, even stationary objects. They have also noticed that when two things approach each other, they start vibrating at the same frequency. They synchronize. As a therapist, I try to keep this in mind. I take a minute or so before seeing a client to ask my parts to step back and let me embody, because the success of the session is proportional to how much self I bring to it. I'm excited to be training senior consultants from international firms like McKinsey, Egon Zehnder, and Mobius to do something similar before they work with their clients. The larger goal becomes to help corporate and political leaders access self, which will then bring forth the selves of the company or country such that the field of self-energy permeates the culture. Flow. Up to now, we've mostly been examining how self-leadership manifests when the self, in its particle state, becomes the active leader of your inner and outer worlds. When that's the case, you are aware that you are doing something, whether nurturing your parts or protesting injustice. What about when self is in its wave state? And are there moments when you exist without being aware of yourself or even yourself? Yourself. Got it. Buddhism refers to such a state as anatta, or no self. These are times when you become so absorbed in an activity that your body moves effortlessly and you lose a sense of separateness. Psychologist Mihaly, oh God, I should know how to say his name. I have his book. I'm just gonna do my best. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi coined the word flow in the 1970s to describe the state and studied it in a variety of contexts. Okay, I'm going to spell it out for you in case you want to Google him. Mihaly is his first name. His last name is Csikszentmihalyi. My brain can't quite sound that out. He found that when people enter flow, they found it to be extremely enjoyable and fulfilling, and they performed the associated activity for its own sake rather than for any extrinsic reward. Common examples include the reverie of jazz musicians or other artists who become totally absorbed in their creative process. I occasionally had experiences like this while playing sports. I would have moments where I'd lose a sense of there being a me other than my body moving in a way that was fluid and effective. I played football in college as a defensive back, and there were times when it seemed like time slowed down and I knew exactly what to do without thinking. I could maneuver around blockers easily because they seemed to be going in slow motion. I enter a similar state sometimes when I teach IFS. It's as if words are coming out of me without forethought, almost like I'm channeling something. I feel totally calm, confident, and clear, but without noticing that I'm having those feelings because I'm just being. Those times are also extremely rewarding, which is partly why I teach so much. Afterward, I feel glad if people like the workshop or me, but that's not my primary motive. I love the flow feeling I get and the sense that I'm fulfilling my purpose in this lifetime. I believe that flow states are examples of when all your parts are fully aligned with the purpose or pleasure of the activity, so their selves meld with yours. In a sense, they temporarily dissolve and you are in the non-dual wave state, even though you are still operating in this world. I love it. Those flow experiences don't characterize our daily lives because most of the time we are blended with parts that are working inside to keep us safe, functional, and happy. As you unburden and your parts increasingly trust each other and you do feel increasingly integrated and clear about your purpose, so more and more of your life is spent in that unified flow state. Beyond these flow experiences, many people have had unforgettable moments in their life when they glimpse pure wave state self. In The Color Purple, Alice Walker's character Shug describes her moment. But one day when I was sitting quiet and feeling like a motherless child, which I was, it came to me. That feeling of being part of everything, not separate at all. I knew that if I cut a tree, my arm would bleed, and I laughed and I cried and I ran all around the house. I just knew what it was. In fact, when it happened, you can't miss it. For many people, these glimpses are often life-changing. Psychologist Steve Taylor chronicles how people across cultures and time periods describe these experiences in similar ways. Surveys have documented that they are not just confined to the ancients and well-known mystics. It seems that more than a third of us have had at least one such experience, and a smaller percentage have them frequently. Here are some of the similarities people describe. A sense that all things are one. We become aware that, say, a tree and a river, or you and I, are only different in the way two waves of the sea appear to be separate and distinct. In reality, they and we are part of the same ocean of being. An awareness that not only are we connected to everything in the world, but we also tap into a much more stable, deep-rooted, and expansive self, which can't be damaged by rejection and doesn't constantly hanker for attention and is free of the anxieties that oppress the ego. Compassion and love for the people around us, but also for the whole human race and for the whole world. I feel like I'm going to sneeze, but maybe not. A new sense of clarity and wisdom that includes the calming sense that everything is okay. We have the beginning sense that all is well, that in some strange way the world, far from being the coldly indifferent place that science tells us it is a benign place. No matter what problems fill our life and how full of violence and injustice the world is, everything is good, that the world is perfect. A vibrating energy that runs through our body and is accompanied by a feeling of intense joy. This isn't a joy because of something, it's just there, a natural condition of being. A diminished fear of death and the knowledge that death is merely a transition. Whew, that's a good list. I've had versions of these experiences while meditating, but more reliably during ketamine sessions with a self-led guide. Mary Cosimano, who coordinated Johns Hopkins psilocybin research for almost 2 decades and guided almost 400 sessions, writes that psilocybin can offer a means to reconnect to our true nature, our authentic self, and thereby help find meaning in our lives. I believe that the nature of our true self is love. What are we to make of these experiences and their uniformity across people? Many who have them feel that they are communing with God and understand them as mystical or spiritual experiences. On the other hand, some scientifically minded people, like physician Alex Lickerman, interpret these experiences as mere brain activity. The reason that descriptions of awakening experiences are so uniform ends up being straightforward. The life condition of enlightenment is rooted neither in a widespread delusion nor a mystic law or supernatural entity, but rather in the neurobiology of the brain itself. It turns out that all the things that have been found to induce awakening experiences, from meditation to seizures to the use of psychedelic drugs like psilocybin, induce measurably identical changes in the brain. The less materialistic and killjoy interpretation of that neurological observation is that it makes sense that the same brain area shuts down if each of these experiences are opening to pure self. For me, self is not a brain state. Instead, it is a spiritual essence within us and around us, like a field, that can quiet that thinking part of the brain. I hope one day to conduct a study in which subjects access self through IFS and see if the same part of the brain is deactivated. From my perspective then, these are what Ken Wilber calls peak experiences, in the sense that we are getting a peek or glimpse of the pure self that is always there. It's just that it's usually obscured by our parts and their burdens. We are indeed communicating with God if you consider self to be God within us. The qualities listed above from Taylor's research are remarkably similar to the 8 C's covered earlier: connectedness and clarity, or part of the same ocean; calm and confidence, everything is okay; compassion for everyone; and courage, no more fear of death. We can imagine that people also touch the other 2 C's, curiosity in terms of awe at the whole experience, and creativity in the form of the epiphanies that are often reported. Do these peak experiences, PEEK, of accessing pure self and feeling connected to everything create a different mindset? Researchers Kate D. Bowles and Mark Leary developed a brief belief in oneness scale and correlated the degree to which a person holds such beliefs with their general values. Their scale used the following 6 items. 1. Beyond surface appearances, everything is fundamentally one. 2. Although many seemingly separate things exist, they are all part of the same whole. 3. At the most basic level of reality, everything is one. 4. The separation among individual things is an illusion. In reality, everything is one. 5. Everything is composed of the same basic substance, whether one thinks of it as spirit, consciousness, quantum process, or whatever. 6. The same basic essence permeates everything that exists. And everything is one. They didn't say that, but it just feels like you should add it in if you're going to say it 3 times. They found that those who scored higher on this scale were far more likely to identify with and feel connected to distant people and with aspects of nature than those at lower scores. They were also more likely to have compassion for the welfare of others because of feeling connected to a common humanity, common problems, and imperfections. In other words, experiencing a state of pure self changes people. As the veils of separateness fall away and they experience the reality of our interconnectedness, they become more self-led inside and out. Ralph de la Rosa suggests that at least his version of Buddhism aligns with this position. It might seem that we have to generate the sense of openness, freshness, joy, revelry, or stillness we touch in such moments. From the Buddhist perspective, however, such a state of being is already there within us and has been so since the beginning. It's tantalizing to think that perhaps expansiveness lies waiting to be uncovered within us while we go searching for it everywhere else. It's not something we go towards so much as it is what we are left with when all our running around ceases. Our deeper nature is simply what's left when we put down the endless task of trying to be somebody. Oh, I love this book. I'm really enjoying all the different aspects of it, all the parts. There are no bad parts. We're at part 3, which I'm sure will be another awesome part. Self in the body, self in the world. And it looks like we only have, 3 chapters left. So here we go. We're almost done. We're at least past 2/3 done. And yeah, I guess I don't have anything else to say. Thanks for joining me. I may have made a mistake by getting coffee with cream because I'm feeling a little congested, but I hope I spoke clearly enough for you to understand everything, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Talk to you soon. Bye.